Right, let me just set the scene. I'm Alice, 29, born and bred, well, just outside of Bristol. You know, a bit of a dreary patch, but it was home. This whole sorry tale starts, as they often do, with me being absolutely gutted and financially skint after a rubbish flatshare situation. I needed somewhere fast, and that's when Mark sauntered back into my life. I met Mark a few years back, briefly, but we reconnected on a dating app. He was charming, articulate, and, crucially, he owned a 3-bed Victorian terrace in a rather posh bit of the city. He wasn't just living there, he owned it outright. That, right there, was the first trap. I was viewing him through the lens of my current, desperate housing situation. Our first few months were a whirlwind of the good stuff. Sunday roasts, cozy nights in, trips to the pub where he'd always insist on getting the round in. I genuinely thought, blimey, this is it. I found a proper one. Then came the conversation. The one where he casually dropped the bombshell. Look, Alice, I love having you here, honestly. But, you know, things are getting a bit serious now. And well, the mortgage isn't going to pay itself, is it? I was a bit slow on the uptake. I mean, I bought the food, I paid for the electricity bills when they came, I chipped in. But he wasn't talking about chipping in. He was talking about rent. Proper, formal rent. He sat me down with a printout, a very official-looking document, mind you, listing the market rate for a room in that area. It was extortionate. It was about $700 a month, and that didn't even include the council tax or the water rates, which he insisted on splitting separately. I remember feeling this immediate, cold dread. I didn't want to move again. I didn't want to lose him. So I signed. Or, rather, I agreed to the standing order. I thought, it's just rent, people pay rent. But here is the absolute state of the situation, the moment that should have had me running for the hills. A month after I moved in, Mark installed a camera, a little, inconspicuous thing, facing the main living room door. He called it security. I know now, looking back, it was the start of him using the house, his ownership, and that ridiculous rent agreement, to absolutely control my life. I had gone from being his girlfriend to his tenant. And he was a landlord who was well and truly taking the mick. That rental agreement, that standing order, it wasn't a partnership, it was a leash. The security camera was just the opener. Next came the house rules. Mark, who had always seemed like a fairly laid-back bloke, suddenly produced a laminated list. Laminated. They weren't common-sense rules, like don't set the kitchen on fire. Oh no. They were targeted, specific, and totally bonkers. Rule 3, all laundry must be done on Sunday, between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m., and must be removed from the area by 4 p.m. Why? Because he needed exclusive access to the utility room the rest of the week. Rule 6, the TV volume in the living room must never exceed 15 after 9 p.m. Yet, he'd be playing his loud, rubbish podcasts until midnight. I felt like I was back at university, but paying premium for the privilege. If I broke a rule, and he was always watching, always looking at the footage, always clocking the state of things, he'd dock the rent. Seriously. A missed laundry window. That's a $10 fine added to the next month's standing order. A sock left on the floor. Another $5. It was petty, humiliating, and financially draining. I was working a decent, full-time job in admin, but after the $700 rent, the council tax split, the water rates, and his increasingly frequent fines, I was chronically skint. Every payday, I was basically handing over my wage packet to the man I was supposed to love, the man who was meant to be my partner. I started avoiding the living room, staying in the bedroom, my $700 a month cell, just to avoid his scrutiny. One evening, I had a mate, Sarah, over. Just for a cup of tea. Nothing mental. Mark came in, stone-faced, and practically stood over us. After she left, he exploded. Not shouting, but that cold, clipped British fury that somehow sounds worse than shouting. "You didn't inform me you were having a guest," he said, checking his watch. Rule 11, all guests must be cleared 24 hours in advance. I tried to argue, "Mark, she's my friend, it was 20 minutes. He simply pointed to his phone. That'll be a £25 breach fee, Alice. And next time, I'll need a copy of her ID for insurance purposes. I was absolutely gobsmacked. My stomach felt like lead. That night, I cried myself to sleep, curled up in my expensive, rented bed. I realized then that this wasn't a relationship. It was an extremely poorly run, highly manipulative glorified B&B where the landlord was getting his oats, too. The toxic power dynamic was suffocating, and I knew deep down I had to get out, but he held the literal keys to my freedom. The worst part about being in a toxic situation like this is the isolation. Mark had expertly used the house as a physical barrier. He controlled the post, the visitors, even the heating thermostat. He was always freezing, and I was always boiling, but the bill is mine, Alice. My friends started saying, "Are you all right? You're a bit quiet," and I just told them I was busy. I couldn't bear to explain that my loving boyfriend was essentially running a punitive £700 a month commune. The fall came one Saturday morning. It was a miserable, wet day, typical UK weather, really, and I was feeling low. I had just found out he had put another £20 fine on my next rent payment because I had left a window open in the bedroom wasting heat. I was absolutely fuming. I went downstairs to make myself a strong cup of tea, and there he was, sitting in the lounge, talking loudly on the phone. I heard him say, "Yes, the new tenant is settling in nicely. She's a bit of a mug, but she pays on time, and she's not a lot of bother." My blood ran cold. Tenant. Not girlfriend, not partner, but tenant. And a mug. I stood there, clutching my mug of tea, absolutely frozen in disbelief. He hung up and looked up at me, that smug little smirk on his face. He knew I'd heard. "Who was that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Oh, just my accountant, sorting out the paperwork," he replied, completely unfazed. "You know, claiming the income you provide for tax purposes. Good on the old bottom line, isn't it?" That was it. The final, brutal reality check. He didn't see me as a person, a future, or even a girlfriend. I was a cash flow opportunity with added benefits. I went mental. Not shouting, not crying, but that controlled, dangerous anger. "You think I'm a mug? You think I don't know what you're doing, using this tenancy to control and fine me? We are in a relationship, Mark. You are betraying me." He just sat back, legs crossed, still smug. "No, Alice. You signed the agreement. You're a tenant. And in fact, based on your current display of aggression, you're in breach of your contract and causing an unacceptable disturbance. I am now giving you formal written notice." And then he did the most disgusting thing. He pulled out a folded A4 sheet from under the coffee table, a pre-written, formal notice to quit, citing breach of contract and unreasonable behavior. I stared at it. It was printed, signed, and dated. He'd had it ready, just waiting for the moment I finally snapped. He was that prepared. The whole thing was an absolute state. I felt a wave of nausea. I had been living with a complete monster. I grabbed the notice, crumpled it, and threw it across the room. "You know what? Keep your bleeding house, Mark. I'm going." I marched back to the bedroom, the adrenaline pumping, finally, seeing the whole toxic charade for what it was. I knew I couldn't just do a runner. He would make my life hell, he'd keep my deposit, which was another £700 on top of everything, and he'd probably claim I owed him money. I had to get my ducks in a row. The sight of that pre-written eviction notice, the sheer calculated coldness of it, gave me the clarity I needed. First, I called Sarah, my mate, the one Mark had tried to fine me £25 for seeing. I spilled the entire, humiliating truth. She was absolutely furious on my behalf. "Alice, you are an idiot," she said, "but you are my idiot. Pack a bag and come stay with me tonight." No argument. Having her support was a lifeline, a proper UK friend response. But the real turnaround came when I looked at the tenancy agreement properly. It wasn't a formal, legally sound UK tenancy agreement. It was a rubbish template he'd downloaded and filled out, full of grammatical errors and clauses that simply wouldn't hold up in court, particularly regarding the arbitrary fines. More importantly, I realized I had a weapon. Mark, the prestigious, property-owning, financially savvy arse, was an HMRC employee. He worked for the tax office. I started collecting evidence. I went through the ridiculous house rules, the WhatsApp messages where he demanded the fines, and, most crucially, I found a printout of his accountant's email. The one where he was claiming the rental income. I knew, from conversations he'd had, that he'd been doing this for years, renting rooms out on the sly, probably to multiple vulnerable people, and not declaring the income properly to HMRC to avoid paying tax. The rental agreement with me was the smoking gun, proof of undeclared income and the deposit he was demanding. I didn't plan revenge, I planned justice. I got all my evidence, took photos of my possessions, and carefully boxed up the essential stuff. I knew Mark wouldn't be back from work until 6 p.m. At 5:30 p.m., Sarah pulled up in her rubbish little Fiesta. We loaded everything, quietly, efficiently, and I left a short, sharp note on the kitchen counter. Dear Landlord Mark, your tenancy is terminated. Keep the deposit. You'll be hearing from someone else about your undeclared income. You're the mug. Cheers, Alice. I walked out that door, feeling the fresh, damp Bristol air hit my face, and for the first time in over a year, I felt like I was free. The aftermath was exactly what he deserved. Mark tried to call me 100 times, screaming about the deposit and the contract. I blocked him. He sent furious texts threatening legal action, which I simply forwarded to Sarah, who laughed hysterically. Then, about 2 months later, Sarah forwarded me a link to an article in the local Bristol paper, tucked away in the business section. It was about a highly embarrassing internal investigation at the local HMRC office regarding an employee accused of tax evasion and misuse of his position. They didn't name him, but the details, a property in a posh area, undeclared rental income, it was Mark. I never heard directly from him again, but I heard from a mutual acquaintance that he lost his job, had to pay a huge penalty to HMRC, and eventually had to sell the terrace house to cover his costs. The house that had been my gilded cage became his downfall. The whole experience left me feeling incredibly cynical, yet oddly resilient. It taught me that sometimes the most dangerous toxic relationships aren't the ones where they shout. They're the ones where they use a piece of paper, a standing order, and a smile to slowly, methodically, bleed you dry. I didn't get my deposit back, and I was skint for a good while, but honestly, the sweet, sweet justice of knowing his control mechanism. The house, the money, was the very thing that brought him down was worth £1,000. I'm renting a lovely little flat now, perfectly legal, with a brilliant, slightly eccentric landlady. And if anyone, ever, mentions installing a security camera facing the main door, I'm doing a runner. Because sometimes, walking away from toxicity isn't just self-preservation. It's the smartest, most gobsmacked thing you can ever do.